I'll get this going. So good afternoon, everybody. Jose Delgado here. Gonna officially begin the audit committee meeting. Today's Wednesday, December 18th, 5:03. We have with us today in person, Bill Mahoney, who's our head of HR here. What's the official title? I don't want to butcher the
Director of HR and Labor Relations.
Director of HR and Labor Relations. We also have Commissioner Calvi here from the fire department. So thank you guys both for coming in person.
Thank you.
And then online, we have our auditor, Young No. And then I see Erica Floyd.
She's my CFO.
Oh, all right. Got the big guns. Perfect. All right, Young, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Wanted to present two reports tonight. One is citywide overtime audit, and the other is the fire department overtime audit. So in the interest of Commissioner Calvi and Erica Floyd's time, I recommend that we start off with the fire overtime audit first, even though it's stated differently in the agenda.
I was gonna ask you to do that anyway, so I appreciate you bringing it up.
Sure. So if I will share my screen with the fire overtime report. So hopefully everyone sees
Yes.
fire overtime report.
Is it possible to increase it a little bit on your end?
All right, so let me see if I can increase it a little
Just
more.
zoom in a little.
Let's see. Oops.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, what is that?
I'm messing it up.
There you go.
Is that better?
No, now you're going backwards.
How about this?
Well, right there. That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So first I want to thank Commissioner Calvi and Erica Floyd for their cooperation and assistance regarding this audit. We did this audit as a special request to Kathy Bono, who's the city's CAFO. She had wanted us to take a look at the overtime processes at the fire department due to primarily the increase in overtime costs in FY24. Let me start off by giving you a little background about the fire department. So on this page here, you see a graph of the number of calls that the fire department had received in FY24. So in FY24, they received approximately 21,000 calls, which they responded to. So majority of those calls pertain to medical emergencies. And there's a small portion that represents calls related to fire, I think about 3%. So this is fairly consistent with national average. I think the national average is anywhere between 4 and 5% of calls being related to fires. So the city is, pretty consistent, and most of these other fire departments, most of their calls pertain to medical emergencies. So I want to turn to page 5 here, the fire time costs. So on page 5, overtime increased by 142% from 1 million in FY22 to over 2.5 million in FY24. That's a significant increase. Now, this increase could be attributed to a couple of things. One being in FY22, the commissioner created a TAC unit. I think he created, 2 TAC units that increased the minimum staffing levels from 43 to 47 per shift. In addition, over this period, you see an increase in injury hours. So if I turn to the next graph, you can see the increase in injury hours going from, I think, about less than 36,000 hours in FY22, and it jumps to slightly over 40,000 in FY24. So the use of injury time results in a need for the fire department to backfill temporary vacant positions, which results in or which contributes to overtime. So so that's a brief background on the department, and I'm not going to get into particulars in terms of the number of fire stations and such, but I want to move on to the objectives scope. So our primary objective of this audit was to assess the fire department's administration and use of overtime and identify areas of risk and potential opportunities for cost saving. So our scope encompassed fiscal year 24. So I do want to say that overall, the fire department's administration of overtime is fairly sound. Erica Floyd and her staff, they do a good job in managing the fiscal operations of that department. So I want to give kudos to them. So the findings that we came up with in this audit primarily relate to cost saving ideas and recommendations, and maybe a suggestion for further improving their processes. So with that, I'll move into the actual audit report.
Young, if you give me a quick pause, I just want to acknowledge two of my colleagues, Counselor Tim Allen, who joined us, and also Counselor Tracy Whitfield are on. I just want to acknowledge them. Thank you for attending.
Okay, so as I'm going through this report, if any counselors or chairperson, if you have a question, please feel free to ask while I'm going to present these findings. So our first finding has to do with certain employees approving their own own overtime. So a key tenet of internal controls is that you want to have someone other than yourself approve overtime, a person that has direct knowledge of the hours you worked. So we noted, I think there were 3 firefighters on 5 separate occasions who approved their overtime. And this, when you have people approving their own overtime, there's a risk that there could be abused or potential fraud. So what we're recommending here is that the fire department build into their telestaff, which is their time and management system, a required approval from their supervisor who has direct knowledge of the employees' overtime worked. So that's the fire department agreed. So they're going to build that into their time management system, which
Already
is
done.
telestaff.
Already done? Okay.
Okay.
So Commissioner just mentioned that they've already implemented that.
Yep. So moving on to the next finding, and I assume no one has questions. It's pretty straightforward.
I just have a question. The fire department already implemented it. Have you all had a discussion about it? Because if they implemented it, is it still high? Fire
Well,
rate?
they implemented it probably after we had written this finding. So our normal process is that we'll go back and retest to ensure that that issue has been remediated. But as of the time of our report, we didn't go back and retest it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So finding 2 has to do with certain firefighters working beyond the maximum work hours. So the fire department has an internal policy in which a firefighter cannot exceed 38 hours of continuous work. We noted, and this is done for safety reasons. So we noted that there were, I think, 4 firefighters that worked beyond the 38 hours. We didn't see any approvals in their time management system. So we're recommending that one, that they have built into this telestaff system that there's I guess, a maximum of hours that you can work. And if you work beyond this maximum hours, it needs to be approved and documented by their supervisor. And it's all due to, looking out for the firefighters' safety, just to make sure that, these policies are being followed. And the other thing we're recommending is that this policy, it's internal. This policy hasn't been negotiated in any labor agreement. We're recommending that this policy be communicated and made available to the firefighters for their information. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions from any of the counselors?
Just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, why did this happen with these particular three firefighters?
I think it was due
five.
to a lack of staffing. They needed people, to backfill these positions, and there weren't that many people available or willing to work the OT. And I think that these were one-offs that supposedly, I think they were approved verbally, but it was never formally documented in the system. So we just want to make sure that there's a process in place to make sure that there's a documented approval process in the system.
Is that the case, Commissioner?
Yes. Instead of having to force someone to work, someone volunteered to work work those shifts. So instead of mandating someone work overtime, we allowed someone to work overtime who had volunteered to do it, but they exceeded their maximum hours.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
And I think one thing also that I think before the counselors joined us, Young had shown a slide that essentially showed a jump in terms of overtime usage from fiscal year 22 to 23. But he also, with that jump, showed the number of injuries on duty. So it kind of helps to explain what Commissioner Young was mentioning in terms of not enough at that moment, I guess. Does that sound accurate, Commissioner?
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Tim, Counselor Allen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Is that BJ? I'm in a waiting room with a lot of people, so I'm just trying to hear what I
Yes.
can hear. That was BJ?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, great, thanks. So the thing about adding the people to go from 43 to 47 per shift across the city, what was the driver for that? Was it safety? Was it just industry protocol? Did we have a problem where we didn't service a fire right away, or what caused that?
We put the TAC units in service due to the high volume of EMS calls. And what we did is we were able to respond to an additional 2,000 calls roughly from the year before by having extra services available, and it cut our response times in the metro area, getting EMS on scene faster.
Okay. Wait, I'm assuming that's the case. And that's a good answer. I just been concerned about the budget implications, and because we just went through the budget process and we get killed with the taxes because of the budget. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong what you did. I'm sure you're trying to do the best job you can with, but just wondering, that's 4 more people per shift. It's like, it's a lot. It's a 10% increase. 4 over 43 is almost a 10% increase. And is that for every shift? BJ?
Yes. The real driver for the overtime numbers was the injury on duty numbers. We went from roughly 36,000 hours to over 41,000 hours in lost time for injury on duty.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's an increase, and you gotta look out for your people. I guess I'd like to hear more about that sometime. And this doesn't have to be the time, but when budget time is coming, I think we're going to be under more pressure. This isn't from the mayor or anything. This is coming from me. In the city council, we're under such pressure on the budget from the public because of the taxes that probably ask a few more questions this year. So that's one I'm already starting to ask. So, how certainly we don't want to put our people in any sort of bad situation where they are understaffed and they can't provide their services. But that's a big increase, 4 over 43. So just expect to hear some more questions from me on that when it comes around again.
Can I just make a comment on that as well? And you
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
can- So just one other layer, and I know that obviously the whole point of this conversation right now is time and personal costs, et cetera. But one layer that I just want to make sure everybody's keeping in mind when we talk about the TAC units is the cost of maintaining the vehicles, like the actual apparatus themselves. So the cost of running a TAC unit versus the cost of running a full fire apparatus, those are two really different costs that we're dealing with. The cost of maintaining and repairing a TAC unit, just even something as simple as brakes, right? Versus or tires. Gosh, that's a huge one. It's so much more expensive to upkeep tires on a full-size truck or engine versus the TAC unit. So that is another layer of cost that I just want to make sure we're thinking about when we're talking about how much the TAC units are costing us, because the wear and tear on the vehicles and the fact that the TAC units are actually taking a couple thousand calls away from heavier, more expensive vehicles. That's just a layer I want to make sure we're keeping in mind when that conversation happens.
Thank you. Tim, I put you on mute, so I don't know if you're trying to speak because it was a background noise.
Who, me?
No, it's Tim. There was some background noise, so I had muted him, so I don't know if he had anything else to say on that.
I wanted to tell Erica, thank you. Good to have her on. Hey, Erica.
Hi.
And I hope that we can have conversations ahead of time about the TAC units and the different costs before the next before budget season gets like really going, but because we really need to know these things because we don't. And the few minutes that we get during budget time just really isn't enough. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is just such a big difference to, what everybody's been used to at the fire department. It's definitely worth having a conversation to make sure all those layers of understanding are considered. Because it's something that doesn't come to mind unless you're, in this department and doing all of these things. So, yeah, I'm always open to a conversation. You know that.
Of course, look forward to it.
So Counselor, just as to hit a key thing that Erica brought up, if we send a engine company out or a ladder truck to respond to a life-threatening emergency and we hit a curb with it making a corner and cut a tire, that's $1,500 to $2,000 to replace a tire. Whereas the TAC unit, if we were to cut a tire, it's $150 or $200. So
Wow.
number
that's
one,
different.
Number one, the pieces are smaller and they're easier to maneuver in the metro areas. So we're not wrecking the tires that we were wrecking on the big apparatus. We're saving run hours on a $2 million piece of equipment and using a smaller vehicle to do these runs. And we've expanded the number of calls we're able to handle and the speed that we're able to handle them in.
Oh, that's great.
Go ahead, Tim.
Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Counselor.
Okay, first off, who is Erica?
Erica's the CFO for fire department.
She's the what for the fire department?
CFO.
Chief Financial Officer.
CFO, okay, thank you. As I said, there's all kinds of background music here, or noise here. I'm at a physical therapy place. BJ, you're talking about this smaller unit. I'm not sure I've ever heard of it before. What is it called?
It's a tactical EMS response unit. We've been running them since 2021. And we've used them to decrease our response times in the congested metro areas where we're seeing the heaviest amount of overdoses in the city to ensure we can provide the fastest and best possible service we can.
So this is often so it's not necessarily for fires as much as it is for responding to medical emergencies.
It's for both, but their primary mission is medical emergencies.
Okay, good explanation. Thanks.
No, I definitely think, I agree with Counselor Whitfield in terms of making sure that we have some of this stuff ahead of time. So I appreciate you guys flagging it now. And Counselor Allen, one of the things you might have.
And I don't have I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, one of the things you might have missed in the beginning is they said that in the fiscal year 22, they responded to 21,000 calls, but a big majority of them were medical emergency calls, so it makes sense why, Commissioner, has really kind of focused on this TAC unit or so.
Yeah, but
More to come.
no, that's great. I just, the thing that crosses my mind is, Helen Carlton Harris is managing, 1.5 million that we just got from the opioid settlement or something. And I just wonder if some of that could be used for this, or, what the restrictions are and stuff, because it's clear that these are being used for, opioid response, not just fire. So that's just thinking out loud. That's all.
That was the initial plan, but we found out that we were unable to use that money for that reason.
Yeah, I know that happens with a lot of that kind of stuff. But anyway, we'll have a longer discussion on it at some point. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so, with that, I'll move on to the next finding, which is on page 9. So what we did here is compare the approved suppression employees for the fire department and compared it to the actual hires in the city's accounting system, Munis. So we did it as of June 30th, 2024, and the previous fiscal years. So the red bar here represents what the fire suppression was approved for firefighters, 251, and in FY22 we noted they were at 228. FY23 approved for 255. They had hired 239 or employed 239 as of June 30th, 2023. And in FY 2024, approved for 255. They had hired 236 as of June 30th, 2024. So that's a difference of about 19 firefighters. I know the fire department had a different figure, which was slightly less. I think they came out to be closer to 15, but based upon their internal records. But the overall theme here is that they're short-staffed. They're in the process, I think, of having recruits in their academies to whittle this number down. And what we also did here in the next page is do an analysis on I guess the cost of overtime versus hiring additional staff. So what we found out that when we did this analysis, had the fire department hired an additional 10 firefighters, they would have saved approximately $139,000 in FY24. So the theme here is it's cheaper to hire more firefighters than paying overtime. And they are working with the finance department and getting the number of headcounts up to where they need to be.
Got it. We have a quick question from Councilor Whitfield. Quick, Councilor.
Are there any academies on the horizon to close this gap?
We actually have 6 in the academy right now. They're graduating in about 2 weeks. And then we have another group that's starting. I got their start dates today, actually, March 13th they begin. They'll be graduating that academy June 2nd. So that means that they'll be in the stations June 23rd. And I had to get to the point where we had start dates for this group. In order to start the next civil service pulling of names, there needs to be you need to accomplish a certain level of hiring on the current group you're working on before you can pull the next list to start the next hiring round. So now that we actually have that date, I can close out that requisition and then put the next one through the state. And we're going to be hiring 12 more for that round.
So the round that's starting in March is 13?
It's 6.
6.
Oh, 6. Oh, 6. I thought one was finishing at 6.
So we have 6 finishing and then 6 going in. So it's a tough process because from the time we input the requisition to PRC to the time that these guys actually start, it's about a 5 to 6 month period. because there's so many steps in hiring these guys. So when we input the requisition to PRC, we'll put in for the number of vacancies we have at that moment. But within 6 months, we have retirements, we have guys that don't make it through the academy, we have people withdraw. So we never end up to the point of fully staffed. So for this next group of 12, they're allowing us to begin the process for hiring people prior to all the vacancies actually quote unquote existing, because we have people in the retirement pipeline. We have people with retirement dates. So it's just, I guess, a little bit of a shift in the mindset and what PRC is allowing us to do as far as hiring. They're letting us get ahead of the attrition versus waiting until the vacancies exist and then 6 more months to hire them.
Thank you. I have some more questions, but I'll wait until we have a different meeting. I'll set up a meeting with you, Erica.
Okay.
Thanks, Counselor. All right, Young.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next finding, finding 5. And this has to do with using acting fire chief roles more efficiently. The acting fire chiefs are usually staffed by captains, and they have to be trained in this position in order to serve as an acting role. We noted that, for the year that we reviewed FY24, fire chiefs worked approximately 2,500 overtime hours, incurring about over $220,000 in OT. So if they had used acting fire chiefs a bit more efficiently, that would have certainly reduced that overtime cost, because acting fire chiefs are paid at a lower rate than a fire chief working overtime. So we're recommending that the fire department aggressively train their captains to be acting fire chiefs, and to encourage them to fulfill that overtime needs as acting fire chiefs. I know there are rules in place where I think on a weekend shift that there has to be one actual fire chief working, and one could be staffed by an acting fire chief. And I think for the weekdays, both fire chiefs could be filled in by an acting role.
Not anymore. There has to be one permanent fire chief on duty all the time.
Okay, stand corrected. Yep. So again, it's with that in mind, I mean, if again, the whole recommendation here is trying to, if there's a vacancy there, try to staff it with an acting fire chief first before moving on to requesting an actual fire chief staffing that role.
Thanks, Young. Commissioner, how many fire chiefs do you guys have?
We have 11 district fire chiefs. 3 are staff chiefs, 8 are line chiefs. The line chiefs, we maintain 1 line chief on duty all the time.
Okay.
It's unsafe to have 2 actors on at the same time. So you need 1 permanent fire chief who's actually a fire chief sitting in the seat at all times, just to oversee things and make sure things are going smoothly. The other problem we had was being able to fill is we had 3 district chiefs that were out. So we had 3 captains who were fully qualified who were working as temporary district chiefs. We had 3 temporary captains who were ineligible to work as district fire chiefs because they don't have the time and grade. You can't work 2 grades out.
Okay.
So if you're already a lieutenant working as a captain, you then can't work as a district fire chief. Also, we had newer captains who didn't have the requisite 1 year in grade yet to be able to be trained as a district fire chief.
Got it. And you said there was 3 fire chiefs were out. Were all those the injury?
Long-term illness, injury.
Okay.
We've got 1 out now who has had a heart attack. So
now, the 11 that you guys currently have, is that the max that you can have, or?
yes.
Okay.
So we've got a district chief in training. We have a district chief who does emergency management. And then we have a district chief in staff services, which helps with a lot of the administrative functions and things like that. So we have the 3 staff chiefs who work Monday through Friday, but they have their own work to do. And then we have line chiefs who are the ones who work in the cars covering the shifts in the street.
I was just curious because I know I don't know how it is from the fire department. I know on the police side, I know he's trying to do his job to try to fill certain spots, but he's also having to pull from, lower ranks. And so
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you guys were having that same.
So our issue was that the gap with promotions, you have to be sitting in a captain's role for a year before we can train you to be a district fire chief.
Got it.
And then we had some of those people who could work as district fire chiefs who were already working in that role on a temporary basis, and their replacements can't even work as a temporary acting district fire chief.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. No.
Okay, so moving on to our last finding, and this has to do with aligning current overtime practices to the FSLA standards. So FSLA, for those that don't know, is the federal law regarding pay and overtime and fair labor practices. So what FSLA specifies, and they have a specific provision for employees working in fire suppression. So they state that employees engaging in fire protection activities may work up to 212 hours in a 28-day work period before receiving overtime. So the city follows the 28-day work period according to the labor contract. So what this in essence means that you have to work about 53 hours before receiving overtime. In practice, the fire department pays overtime for hours worked above 42. So that's an 11-hour difference at time and a half. So we calculated, had the fire department adhered to this FSLA standard, the city could have potentially saved approximately $382,000. Likewise, there's another provision in FSLA that states that overtime should be based upon hours worked. So that means you got to actually work in order to receive overtime. In practice, what the city does, or the fire department does, along with many other city departments, is that they include leave hours in the calculation of overtime. Leave hours include vacation, sick, injured on duty, holiday. So we did the calculation, had the fire department adhered to the FSLA standards on actually working for receiving overtime. The city could have potentially saved approximately $143,000. So we're recommending that. I know Bill Mahoney had indicated that labor negotiations with the fire union recently concluded. But perhaps in the next round, this could be an item for discussion to for renegotiating some of these OT practices.
Bill, can you speak a little bit to that? Because
Sure.
There was a lot there, so.
Yep. So the auditor is correct. There is both there's Fair Labor Standards Act overtime, and then there's contractual overtime. In Massachusetts, well, anywhere in the country, the FLSA is the floor. You cannot go below the floor on the FLSA. So there's an exemption for police and fire so that overtime doesn't have to be based on a 40-hour work week. And as Young was saying, in our fire department, it's based on a 28-day cycle, 212 hours for the FLSA overtime. For the contractual overtime, it's different. The contractual overtime is whatever the parties are going to negotiate. Under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 150E, their overtime is a mandatory subject to bargaining. And our overtime rules probably go back decades. And they do include, as he described, overtime, beyond the 42-hour work week, the 210s and the 214s, you're going to end up paying overtime for that. And there's a reason for that. One is we want to encourage people that have put in, the 210s and the 214s, and when we need them, we want to have them come in and work for us for another shift, or maybe 2 other shifts even. And they're not going to do it at straight time. They've already put in their 42, and they're going to want to, if they're going to have to be enticed to come in to work the extra hours. The other piece of this in labor relations that we're concerned with is that, as Young was saying, we do have to negotiate it. We're in contract negotiations now. By the time we looked at this, we had already closed out new proposals. So they're already closed for this round of negotiations. If it was something we were going to do, it would have to be done in the next round of negotiations. The reality, though, is that this would be a very big hill to climb because in Massachusetts, we close out police and fire negotiations and interest arbitration. So we would actually have to convince an interest arbitrator that we want to do something that really isn't being done in the other unionized workforces for fire departments across the state, and that is just to pay FLSA overtime. It is something we can take a shot at. We can certainly put it on the table. It would be a heavy lift to get that done, and it would be very difficult to convince an interest arbitrator of that.
When's the next round of that?
We're in it now. We're in right now. So we've already begun negotiations. We're into it. We've already closed all of our new proposals. So I can't put any new proposals on the table pursuant to our ground rules. So I really couldn't put a proposal in like this at this point.
Till 2030.
Yeah, till the next round, we would get to them, 28.
2028.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So you're saying a lot of stuff that I don't understand, and I just gotta ask these questions. According to our ground rules, who is our?
The city and the union have ground rules for negotiations. So when we meet on our first session, the parties will propose ground rules for how to actually conduct the negotiations between the two parties. Those are called permissive subjects of bargaining, and you don't have to agree to them. You can proceed without, and sometimes we do proceed without. But we typically like to get everything on the table. We like to get ground rules so the parties understand how we're going to treat each other in the negotiations.
So it's not a written law, it's just something that you all do as a courtesy, professional courtesy to each other?
Well, either side can propose ground rules. Neither side has to agree to them. So most of our contract negotiations, we have ground rules. It's a very standard topic in negotiations between management and labor.
So it's a practice, but not a law.
It's a practice, but not a law.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to, because when you say words like we can't do this and we can't do that, to me, that's like subject to law, and this doesn't seem like it is. And then the second question that I have, Bill, is I'm trying to just understand, I forgot what I'm trying to understand, Bill. It's be old age. It happens to me all the time. It be old age. I'm trying to understand the laws, I guess. Like Young No told us about the law of the 42 hours versus 53, right? That's the numbers. And then you're saying according to the mass law, you can use 42 hours, but according to some other law, it's supposed to be FLSA law, it's supposed to be 53 hours. I'm just trying to figure out why there are different laws we're going by.
Right. So what you're probably most familiar with is there's a 40-hour work week for most employees that are what are called non-exempt employees. And if they work beyond 40 hours in a work week, they're going to get time and a half. They're going to get overtime pay. That's for what we call non-exempt employees. Firefighters are non-exempt employees, but there is an exception to that 40-hour work week law under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And what that says is that you can actually have a 28-day period rather than a 7-day period. And if you have a 28-day period, you can have 212 hours. And what that does is that typically protects a lot of public employers from FLSA overtime violations because you're using a longer period of time and there's less likely chance that you'd have an FLSA violation. So that's the floor. The ceiling, however, is you can negotiate beyond that floor to different benefits. And what typically happens with fire and police and with all employees really is that you're going to negotiate something into your contract that's going to say you get overtime, not necessarily just when the FLSA is kicking in, but if you work more than 40 hours in a work week, or if you work more than 8 hours in a day for non-police and fire, those types of things will create other overtime obligations under a contract that don't exist under the federal law.
I appreciate it. Just in the interest of time, Bill, I know like Council Whitfield, there's probably a lot here that we could probably ask you questions. So I'm wondering if at some point next year, just because there's a number of different labor agreements that you guys work on, is it possible to even give the council or folks that are interested kind of just like a high level breakdown of how that stuff works? Because a lot of times when you guys come to the table to us, and you know, during the year asking for extra money because of this labor, a lot of times we don't get, like, we get like a high level at, you know, that specific, but I think having our council, you know, better understand that might be, at least for me, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but we understand it a little bit better in the future.
So the down and dirty layman's explanation of this is firefighters work a 42-hour work week.
Yeah.
2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights. It's a 42-hour work week that continually shifts.
Yep.
So it's.
Yeah, and I don't want to.
No, but I'm just gonna give it the basic, just so you guys understand it. So if 1 week you're actually gonna work 36 hours, 1 week you're gonna work 48 hours. Just depends on how the schedule rotates through. 2 days, 2 nights, it always rotates. The way everyone in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is paid by their contract, without exception, is if you work past your 42 hours, you get an overtime shift.
Yeah.
So if you work more than 2 days, 2 nights, you're making overtime. If you're sick for one of those, that counts as a work day. You're getting overtime. So if you work an extra shift, and that is not unique to the city of Springfield, that is across the board in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and all of New England, pretty much for that matter.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
just so everybody understands, we aren't doing anything out of the ordinary. This is the way it's done in the entire New England area.
No, thank you.
Well, we're not doing anything, if you could let me finish, Counselor, we're not doing anything out of the ordinary, but from what I'm understanding, it's not the law. It's not the law. And I don't care what, and I tell my kids the same thing, I don't care what anybody else's parents are doing with them in certain situations. I'm the parent, so I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. As a city councilor, it doesn't seem like, even if every single municipality was doing what you're doing, it doesn't seem like it is in line with what the law says that we should be doing. Is that accurate?
No.
No. We are in
Okay.
compliance with the law. We're in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. We are paying as we are required to pay by the Fair Labor Standards Act. We are also paying as we are required by our collective bargaining agreement with our union, which says we will pay it a little bit differently and above what the FLSA is requiring. And that is subject to negotiations, and we are compliant with our contract. And that is the law.
So what are we talking about here? Young, tell me, what are we talking about here? Are they,
So the whole
I don't
objective of this finding is like, FSLA says that here's the floor. You know, this is what the law requires at minimum. You don't necessarily have to stick to the minimum. You can be more generous than what the law requires, and that's what the city's doing right now.
That's
They're
what
being
we're
more
doing.
generous
Generous,
than what
yeah.
the actual law requires.
I
So
get
I just wanted to point out we're being quite generous. It's like close to $500,000 that we're
Yeah.
paying above and beyond what the floor. I know what other cities are doing, but there are other
Yeah.
cities throughout the country that adhere to some aspects of the FSLA, not in entirety, but some aspect of it, and it's saving them some money. So the objective here is just to make it a discussion point for potential future negotiations, because it is a lot of
one
money we're
aspect,
talking.
one aspect, that is a lot of money, and we got people struggling out here just to get taxes paid. That's a lot of money. Along with all the other findings that we have spent a lot of money that we didn't necessarily have to. And I'm not against us being generous, but I am against 40 hours being counted for days that we didn't work, because I know in any organization that I worked for, they did not count non-work days as work hours. I think that's the only provision. I don't mind us being generous in any other thing, but it's not, you're not working 40 hours, you shouldn't, or 42 or 212 or whatever the number is, then we shouldn't get paid overtime for that. Like that one right there doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me. And I appreciate the hard work that our firefighters do on behalf of the city of Springfield and other communities. But no, that one we need to talk about. And when this agreement comes up, if it hasn't been discussed in the labor relations meetings, it will be brought up. And I'm letting you know that I'm going to bring it up because I don't agree with that.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, Young.
So that's it for the fire department. Again, I applaud the department in administering their overtime effectively. Again, want to thank them for their time and effort throughout the course of the audit.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. We moved you up front so you can get out there, help cut down on overtime while you're out there.
Injuries cuts down on overtime. See you later.
All right, take it
Yeah,
easy.
thank you, Commissioner. So, on the subject of overtime, we did a citywide overtime audit, looking at all the city departments, including fire, police, DPW, the school department, to see how overtime is handled. So, first, I want to thank Pat Roach, Bill Mahoney, and their staff for their cooperation throughout this audit. Why do we do this audit? We did it because it was on our audit plan. So I want to. Does everyone see my screen here on the citywide
Yes, we
overtime
see it.
audit?
Yep.
Okay. So just on background, I want to turn to page 3 of this report. So we looked at the makeup of the city employee to see what percentage made up non-exempt versus exempt. And as you can tell from this graph, most employees are non-exempt, 77%. So they're hourly. And I want to turn to
What's our total for total employees? It's
looking at approximately
60 so 7,000.
yep, approximately, yes.
All right.
So I want to turn to the next graph. What department incurs the most overtime? So what you can see here, oh, excuse me. Turn this off. What department incurs the most overtime? As you probably suspected, it's public safety, police, fire, dispatch. 77% of the overtime goes to those departments. So
I see there you have education as 12.9%.
yes,
The second largest. Is that the school department or?
yep, school department.
Okay. I don't know why I was thinking like their budget is kind of separate from ours, even though it's all part of our budget, and then we kind of give it, but never mind, I had a little bit of a brain.
Okay, yep. So moving on to the next graph is the overtime trends. So what you can see here that overtime went down in 2021. That was the result of COVID, and you can see it steadily climbed back up in 2023. It's at 17.7 million as of the end of fiscal year 2023. Moving on to the city's policy on overtime. So there are some departments that factor in overtime into their budgets, but the city has a conservative approach on overtime. It usually has to be approved by finance and managing over and moving forward with overtime.
Can you go back up to that graph really quickly? So it looked like from 2020, 2019, we started to go down obviously because of COVID,
Right.
and 2021, and it looks like it's back on the rise. So am I safe to assume, if COVID wasn't here, we would have had like a steadily increase regardless?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, it's just I know all we can do is look at the numbers. I know it's been on the rise recently because of labor shortages.
Okay.
And it's not only the city of Springfield; it's throughout the country that we're seeing labor shortages. And
Yeah, no, that part that I definitely understand seeing it even on the state level.
yeah. So just moving on to page 7. And this is the graph on labor shortages. As you can see, it was down in 2021 due to COVID, and it, went back up. The reasons for overtime, you have vacancies, you have employees covering other employees' absences, you have minimum staffing levels that we talked about at the fire department. Then on page 8, just want to describe our objectives for this audit. And the primary objective was to determine whether the controls over overtime were adequate and in compliance with laws and regulations. And the scope, we looked at primarily 2022 and 2023 for our testing. So what I want to say is overall, the city's process and administering overtime is pretty sound. So this audit just made some recommendations for improvement at the various departments that were affected in administering overtime. But the two departments that manage overtime are one of the departments, and two is payroll and HR. So with that said, I'll move directly into the findings. So our finding 1A has to do with employees receiving overtime pay for regular hours worked. So I want to state that sound internal controls over the payroll process warrants that HR's role, or human resources role, be limited to hiring employees and establishing rates of pay and schedule, and the payroll department be primarily responsible for processing and distributing payroll. So this issue stemmed from employees that worked in multiple departments. For example, you had an employee that primarily worked for the school department, but also worked in dispatch. And we noted for these affected employees, HR's involvement was a bit, I guess, too much, and it resulted in some conflicting assignments. We call them segregation of duties issues. So we noted that HR role with these employees working in multiple departments, they authorize their overtime hours, they set the rate of pay, they approve the overtime, and they informed payroll to process that overtime. So there was no analysis performed to see what hours should have been paid straight time versus overtime. And there was no record of these hours in the time and management system in Munis, and the actual department head didn't approve the overtime. So all of this resulted in a potential overpayment for approximately $22,000 to 7 employees. So we made this recommendation to the payroll department that they look into this variance, research it, and also develop a process where, hey, just limit HR's role for these for all employees, just an advisory and setting pay rates, and the payroll department work with departments in processing payroll, and in particular having the department approve payroll and overtime, and have all of that done in the time management system, Cronus.
So you mentioned 7 employees. Is that, I guess my question was, how many employees do we have that have those dual roles?
It's pretty rare. We try to keep that as limited as possible. I don't think we have any of those employees working in dispatch at this point. But we had a lot of critical time of making sure we had enough dispatchers in the chairs. And we were using people that had been previously, and I can't say for certain this is what Young found, but we had people that previously had been our trained dispatchers, and they went on to another department.
Okay.
And we were calling them back on a per diem basis. But we tried to get away from that. We now are looking at per diems for dispatch that are former employees of the city, and we will bring them out on a per diem basis, but not someone who's working in another department. We're trying to stay away from that.
Okay, so before though, when you brought them in, you were paying them per diem and somehow they were getting overtime?
Yeah, they most likely were. And part of this too, in Young, I think would agree with me that, we've got 2 separate systems that they're being paid in. And I think HR just kind of got brought into it because we've got to meet our payroll. These are hourly employees at this point. We've got to make that weekly payroll.
Got it.
And if we had a problem with that, we're now in violation of our pay laws in the Commonwealth. I think that's why we got involved, but I don't disagree with Young at all on this. We only want to have that advisory role. He's right. That's what we should be doing.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, exactly. That's, they were, doing this, just to get these people paid. I mean, you had to get people paid. But, now payroll is aware of the issue and they've implemented, procedures to, make sure that they're working with the,
Well, as long as-
departments.
As long as it sounds like they're responding to the recommendation, so.
Yep. So I'll move on to our next finding. And that has to do with, exempt employees, receiving overtime. We noted that there were, $84,000 paid to salaried individuals for overtime. So normally when you're salaried, you don't receive overtime. We noted that 68,000 of the 84 was just a reclassification issue. That employee should have been non-exempt. So that took care of most of that discrepancy, but the payroll department is looking into the remaining discrepancy, slightly less than 20,000, on why overtime was paid to salaried employees. And
Is
they
this the
developed a
same-
process to flag or run a query on any overtime payments paid to exempt employees.
Is this the same kind of example, Bill, on the dispatch, or is this what department or departments?
It could be, and I'm not certain who specifically Young is talking about, and certainly we'll never mention any names, but it could be school department employees working at the Parks Department over the summer. That is an issue. And they work in they are exempt at the school, but they work in a non-exempt role during the summertime for us, either at our camps or in other places. That becomes an issue sometimes. We also had another issue in parks where we had some exempt employees picking up some non-exempt work at night, and we have stopped that this year. We said we don't want that practice to occur.
Got it.
So basically, so with the payroll department, they have a process now that they run a report every month to see if any salaried employees has been paid overtime. So if they do, then they research it and correct that issue.
Right.
So I'll move on to 1C. And this has to do with, again, salaried employees being paid more than their scheduled hours. So most salaried employees in the city get paid for 37.5 hours of work. We noted that there were, say, a handful of employees that were paid more than 37.5, but less than 40. So again, we're making the recommendation to the payroll department to run queries to identify these employees, research it, and resolve the issue in any potential overpayments.
Do we have the same systems from school department to city in terms of, is it all munis? I know Kathy
Yeah,
in the
we're
past
all munis. but
talked
we-
about we're going to a newer system.
We're going to TCP from Kronos, but the police and fire are on a different system called Telestaff. So we are working on, first of all, we're working on getting into TCP.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a huge project for us.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So moving on to 1D, we noted, we looked at a couple of, we looked at some non-bargaining, non-exempt employees or hourly employees, and noted that they were paid more than 40 hours, but were not paid at the overtime rate. So this could be a potential overtime non-payment, or it could be hours that, regular hours that were overpaid. So again, we made the recommendation to payroll to look into this, and also run a weekly query or a monthly query, or whenever when a payroll is processed, to identify these issues.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so moving on to finding 2A, and this has to do with basically how overtime is recorded in the city system. So there are two systems to record overtime. You have the time and management system, which is Kronos, which everyone uses at the city department. And that information gets brought into the city's accounting system, Munis. So we noted that there was approximately 338,000 of overtime that was miscoded as regular time in Munis. So this has an adverse effect on the city because overtime shouldn't be factored into the retirement calculation.
Correct.
So, we're recommending that, the payroll department work with finance to develop a reconciliation process to ensure that information that's brought over to, from Munis in regards to overtime is correctly classified as overtime, in Munis.
So is that, I guess, what happens there? Is that a technology issue? Is that somebody inputting the issue? Like,
It's
How
an inputting issue, from some departments when they, hand over the information, or get the, hand over the, or record the information from from Kronos to, Munis, they miscode it. They miscode the overtime as regular pay.
so at 338, how many employees does that impact?
I can't recall offhand, but that's, more than a few. It's, a lot of employees.
And
So
is
the
there,
key here,
is-
again,
is there a-
Counselor, is, the corrective measure here is to, develop a reconciliation process. Since you have two systems that contain the same information, you want to make sure that the information, from one system to the other is the same.
No, I agree with that. I guess what I'm trying to lead to is there a history here of certain departments, inputting the wrong information?
I think in this instance, I think fire, not fire, but, the police department, I think that it may have been like an upload issue, in, getting this information over. So so I can't recall, other departments that may have had this issue.
Okay. But Bill, you guys are already reconciling that?
It's the payroll department and
Oh,
finance.
payroll, sorry.
Yep.
Well, we don't have anybody here from payroll to speak on this.
No, but, yeah, they assured me that that's being done. Again, our process is to follow up just to ensure that this reconciliation is occurring.
All right.
So, and I just think, the last, finding 3, which I touched upon earlier with, the fire department, is, we noted that, there were, many instances where employees approved their own overtime. Again, it's a risk, for abuse and fraud. So, we're recommending that supervisors who are aware of the employees' work hours be the ones that approve, overtime.
That makes sense to me.
Yep. And lastly, I want to, finding 4 is reiterate the city's practice of paying overtime or calculating overtime, including leave hours, which vacation, sick, injured on duty. Whereas, the federal, FSLA states that, overtime should be based upon actual hours worked. Now, we know, we talked about, fire department does it, but we know police does it, DPW does it. Many departments follow this past practice. So, we did a calculation, had the city followed this floor, as Bill had mentioned, FSLA is the floor. We can certainly be more generous than what the FSLA calls for. But had we adhered to FSLA, the city could have potentially saved over $600,000 for the period that we analyzed. Again, it's not insignificant.
Well,
but
let me ask you a question on that, Mr. No. So when you're talking, we've kind of discussed this FSLA a few times here. So FLSA is a federal standard,
Yes,
right? That's kind of the floor. So, to make it easier, I think of like the federal minimum wage is what, like $7 or something like that? Is
Right.
that kind of the same type of thinking? Is that, or am I generalizing, making it too simplistic there?
Right. no,
as
you're
Bill
right.
mentioned, it's the floor, right, Bill? It's like, it's the, you don't have to, it's stick to what the federal, you can be more generous than what the FSLA calls for. You just
So,
can't.
no, I get that. I guess what I was trying to get to, because I mean, we're in Massachusetts, things here. I want to save as much money as we can here too, but I also understand that we are Massachusetts. So like the federal minimum wage could be like $7. Our federal minimum wage is at above 15 at this point now. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand that this FLSA a little bit am I kind of on the right path with that in terms of there's a federal standard and then Massachusetts and other states kind of have their own standard depending on their.
I don't think there's a. I
Economy.
think all states have to. And then the federal standards is the law of the country. So I don't
Correct.
think there are any laws. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, that contradict FSLA.
No, there shouldn't be. You know, you are accurate, Young. It's the floor, and then we can go like with a minimum wage. We can go above the floor. We can't go below the floor on a federal on a state level. So you know, we're at $15 an hour, and that's just that's just where we go because that's what we voted on in the legislature. But no, I don't see the. We're not going to go below the federal standard, or we can't.
Okay, right. And I want to point out that Springfield is not the only city that does this. There are many municipalities that, you know, are more generous than what the FSLA calls for. But you know, the whole point here is just to bring it to light. You know,
Yep.
telling the audit committee and the city council what it's costing us.
And I guess my question is like, as just bringing the kind of minimum wage as an example, maybe that's a bad example, but I guess that's what I was trying to simplify it is, I guess we would like to get down to the floor standard, but I'm sure there's a competitive nature in terms of
Sure.
us having to be in a certain area. So I guess, I'm just thinking out loud, like, how much wiggle room is there for us to get closer to that in terms of knowing that we could potentially save all this money if we got closer to that floor, but knowing there's also a competitive disadvantage that we have too, in terms of staying competitive with surrounding communities.
Yeah, I mean, think about, and I think it's important that we all think about a lot of what we use this overtime money for. We're using that for plowing snow in the wintertime and sanding our streets. These guys are working hard all week, and then, they're end of shift. They're saying, look, there's some overtime available. Well, we want them to say, yeah, I want that overtime. Yeah, sign me up for it. I'm going to take it. So that's why, even though they took a sick day on Monday and, it's Wednesday, we're counting that hour on Monday. We're not going to just say, well, you were out sick on Monday and, Wednesday you're going to work 4 extra hours, but we're going to penalize you because you're out sick and you're only going to get paid straight time.
I guess.
No one's going to take the overtime.
But that was something that Councilor Whitfield brought up that I wasn't aware of. And is that just kind of how things work when you put in a sick day and you work?
For a lot of contracts, it's not in the non-bargaining, but for the unions, yeah, a lot of them have that as a benefit. Whether it's sick or they take a vacation day or it's a holiday and they didn't work on
So
the
it's only
holiday.
the exempt.
These things get counted. These would be non-exempt bargaining employees that would have those benefits.
Non-exempt bargaining, yeah.
For the non-bargaining, we don't have that rules, but we're certainly looking at those rules because we have groups of non-bargaining that are, critical to the operations of this city, and some of them are non-exempt and are entitled to overtime pay. We got to figure out how we entice them to come in and work that extra shift when we need them.
Got it. Thanks for the explanation, Bill. Thank you. I just want to also acknowledge my colleague, Councilor Davila has joined us. Thank you for joining us. We're at the tail end, Councilor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But with that, I mean, are there any questions from either, Councilor Davila or Councilor Allen, who's been with us the whole time on this last one, or anything, I guess? Like hearing none, I guess, Young, one, thank you so much for presenting this. Overall, if you could summarize, this, I mean, what would you kind of summarize for us in the city council?
So there, I think the city, overall, the city has a sound overtime practice. We made some suggestions for improvement and strengthening some of the protocols and administering overtime.
Go in.
I also want to point out that, yeah, there are some past practices that may have unintended financial consequences
Okay.
on the city.
Let the
And that,
driver
you know,
stop.
these could be certainly reviewed in the future for potential renegotiation, especially with the fire department and
Thank you.
the police department with respect to the minimum overtime threshold that FSLA calls for. And that's a big piece. 11 hours is a big number, a big difference.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. Are there any questions from my counselors before I let everyone go?
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question. Will the auditor be sending that report to all councilors?
Yes, I'll be sending the report tomorrow morning to City Council.
Thank you, Auditor. No. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Davila. Council Allen, any last words from your end? You're on mute if you're speaking.
There. Yeah, I mean, I have some questions, but I don't want to ask them now. I'd just like to debrief with you, Jose,
Okay.
because I was on the thing the whole time and I got most of it, but I didn't see anything. And no reports. I didn't see anything. I just listened.
Okay.
So let's just schedule something where we can catch up on it.
For sure. And Young will be sending us the reports tomorrow. So we'll have all the counselors have it. I mean, I think this is important, especially with all the conversations we're having around, you know, just employment in general. I think, you know, this is good information to have. So.
And my door is always open for any questions.
Thank you, Young. Well, with that, I want to.
How late is your door open, Young?
Not that late.
I was thinking it's 6 o'clock. I was thinking of coming down about 9. Just kidding. All right. Thank you for your work, everybody. Thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate everybody for joining us and staying on. Thank you to Young No and Councilors Davila, Allen, and Whitfield, and obviously to Bill Mahoney and Erica who was on earlier, and Commissioner Calvi. So appreciate your guys' time. Thank you so much. Have a good night and happy holidays if I don't see you guys.
Good night.
Happy holidays.